Hello, college football fans. Welcome to episode 220 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined as always by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello, Husker fans and college football fans.
Hello. For those who may be listening to this podcast for the first time, we are a father-son duo here to talk about college football by college football fans for college football fans. And today we'll be diving into the semifinal games of the college football playoff, Miami versus Ole Miss and Indiana versus Oregon. And we'll be giving our official predictions for the national championship game next week. And also we'll be going over what's been going on in the world of Nebraska football, our favorite team. There's been quite a few new transfer news, and we finally got our defensive line coach, potentially, and things of that nature. So a lot to talk about today.
Yes, exactly. And especially those two semifinals.
Yes. And to kick things off, we're going to stick with our tradition of open up a cold beverage. I got myself my Golden Road Mango Cart here.
Okay. And I am drinking one of the last Pacificos I picked up when I think we were in California visiting you. And I think this is going to be my last one, as now that I'm in Arizona, I will probably be leaning towards my Four Peaks Brewing Company favorites. So cheers to you.
All right. Cheers. So yeah, we're going to kick things off this week with the national side of college football, since it is the talk of the town, now that we're in the meat of the playoffs here. And we'll start with the first game that was played, which was Miami versus Ole Miss. And we gave our predictions on our previous podcast. I said that Miami would win, but that'd be a low-scoring game, so that they would win 20-13. Whereas you went Ole Miss's way, saying they would win 28-17. But the final score of that one ended up being 31-27. So I was right that Miami won, but it ended up being a higher scoring game than I expected. A lot of scoring in the fourth quarter, as it turned out.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that too. Yeah, that it was a defensive battle for sure. Both teams have great defensive talent.
Yeah. Well, and you and I were texting as we were watching that game, because Miami was up at halftime 17-13. But frankly, they should have been up by more. They had kind of, dominated in terms of time of possession. Their defense was playing really well, and they'd had several potential picks that their defenders just couldn't hold on to as well.
Right. I totally agree. Yeah, it was not a great early game performance by Ole Miss, and they had to feel lucky at halftime.
Right. Well, because with Miami, they I think this was in the third quarter, they had a nice drive where they went down the field to like the 24-yard line and then threw a pick. So that was the one turnover the game actually went against Miami. So they missed out on some points there. And they ended up having 10 penalties for 74 yards. So it just felt like they were shooting themselves in the foot whenever they started to get momentum going offensively.
Yep, I felt that way too. It just seems like they would kind of feel like they were about ready to do something positive, and then, a negative event would happen. And, you got to credit the defense for that.
Yeah. But, yeah. And then, like we said, things kind of went wild in the fourth quarter, where there were four lead changes in the fourth quarter, where it just kind of kept going back and forth. And, Miami's devotion to the running game, right? They ran it 51 times throughout the game for 191 yards. It kind of finally started to pay real dividends for them there in that fourth quarter, because you could tell Ole Miss was starting to get tired. Yeah,
it seemed like you felt like Ole Miss was hanging on by a thread, right? They, they were obviously scoring and stuff, but they had to keep finding ways to score, where Miami kind of knew how they were going to score. They just had control of the line of scrimmage, it seemed like.
Though there was a period there where Miami didn't do much offensively, punted it. Then Ole Miss came down and scored and finally went up in the game. And I was kind of worried for Miami. I was like, oh, man, they're going to shoot themselves in the foot here. They've dominated this game, but they're going to lose. And then I think they scored in like 5 plays.
The next time.
Right. Yeah, they had a really good drive where they scored quickly. almost too
Yep.
quickly, in my opinion, because then they left
Yeah.
Ole Miss with time to score.
I think you made that statement to me. I think they might have scored too quick.
Yeah.
Which, there's sometimes some truth to that, especially if you're a team like them who was, running, committed to the running game and typically had some, high volume, multiple play, 10 plus play type drives, right? And then to score more quickly, that's almost unexpected.
Right. Well, that's one of the most surprising stats is you look at time of possession. It was 41 minutes to 19. So they basically doubled
Wow.
Ole Miss in that category.
Yep. Well, and so it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, that's going to make the national championship game quite intriguing. That's for sure.
There weren't a ton of Miami fans in the stadium. Your friend Brian was joking about that in our text thread as well. But they get the fortune of the national championship game this year being in Miami in their home stadium, basically. So they won't have any trouble getting fans in for that championship game.
Correct. I would agree. And that's frustrating to me, right? This team that literally has no legitimate fan base. None, or very, 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 very little beyond parents and a few students will now have this opportunity. And it just blows me away that they can be as talented as they are and have the success both historically and currently as they have with no fan base.
Right.
Well, it's hilarious. It's classic college football, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and to their credit, right, their final drive was a 15-play drive to go down Ole Miss's throats and score the final touchdown that kind of sealed it for them. So that was very impressive, under time constraints. And the fact that they are now in the national championship game being the 10th seeded team, right? The 10th ranked team. So basically, aside from the two group of 5 teams, right, JMU and Tulane, that got into the playoff this year, they were the lowest seeded, Power 4 team. And somehow they've made their way into the national championship, as we'll discuss, against the number 1 ranked team, Indiana. Right. So they're kind of having their own Cinderella run here.
Well, and remember that a lot of the conversation, even though in our podcast, Alex, we were talking and I was expressing my dissatisfaction about the fact that Alabama had gotten in with their record and schedule and all that. The national focus was on Miami because they're the ones that, because they were 14th the week before, and then what was it? BYU lost in their conference championship game. And so Miami replaced them at 13. So now they were right next to Notre Dame. So Notre Dame was sitting there at 12th or whatever. And I don't remember, I might be off a little on the numbers, but bottom line is that it was for the last position that was going to go to a Power 4 team. And then they moved Miami ahead of Notre Dame as well, right? Which is what allowed Miami to even be in, and Notre Dame was out. So ironic that the team that they were arguing didn't deserve to be in over Notre Dame ends up in the championship game.
Right. Well, and it was a debate, right? Because, you and I and quite a few in the national media were saying that Miami should have been ahead of Notre Dame, the previous week, right? Because Miami was the best team in the ACC and did beat Notre Dame, yes, in the head-to-head earlier. So in my opinion, that was more the committee fixing their earlier mistake than anything else. And I think I've clearly been vindicated in that opinion, given what Miami's done here in the playoff.
Oh, absolutely. But it's just funny that was the huge outcry. And obviously, those who have historically argued, back when we had a 2-team playoff or even a 4-team playoff, a lot of times the argument to keep that was, not that I love the old system. Okay. So I want to be clear. I don't want to sound like I'm switching my views, but those who argued that if you get past 4 teams, there's usually a separation at the very, very top. And so, one of those 4 teams is almost always going to win this thing. And then we've had Ohio State, who also was kind of a lower entry into last year's 12-team playoff, who then won the national championship. And now we have potentially a Miami. Well, Miami's already gotten to the championship game, even though they were one of the lowest ranked teams to get into the playoff.
Yeah, well, the other thing I saw people pointing out was that even if we had expanded from 4 to 8, right, if it was an 8-team playoff, Miami would have been left out, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, no, it's definitely impressive from them, and the ACC, right? Now, in terms of the postseason, records, which the ACC's number has certainly been boosted by Miami's success here, because they didn't get the bye. They've been playing all these games, but now the ACC is at 9-4 in the postseason, just behind the Big Ten at 10-5. ACC's proven themselves to maybe be better as a conference than people gave them credit for. Everybody's saying that the Big Ten, the SEC are so far above, the Big 12 and the ACC on paper. But that's why we play the games, right?
Well, that's right. But I always have to be cautionary about these comparative win-loss records in bowl games, especially in the modern era now with all the opt-outs because of the portal and all this other stuff. The incentive for bowl games is radically different than it used to be. The matchups are not nearly as equitable as they used to be. It used to be that they were pretty fixed on how this was going to go, and now they're all over the map. Example A might be for a Nebraska fan that Nebraska was having to play a top 15 team, even though we were 7-5. Right? When you look at conference games, what I would say is I would want to look at head-to-heads within a conference situation, and were those comparable teams, i.e., were they in the relatively same spot of the rankings within the standings? Yeah, that sort of thing. If you had some relative stuff there, then that's a marker I would register. Just like people making too big a deal of a non-conference matchup early in the season when X team beats Y team in the first or second week of the season. And then the whole season progresses, and those two teams could go in radically different directions, right, the remainder of the season, but they still maybe give too much credibility to that early season victory. So,
right.
Anyway.
And then in the Peach Bowl, we had Indiana versus Oregon. Now, Vegas had Indiana as favorites, but around 4 points is the note I have from our last podcast. Mm-hmm. And I kind of reflected that, saying that Indiana would win over Oregon, but that it'd be 24-17, while you went a little bit bigger, saying that they would win 28-17 over Oregon. Vegas also said that Miami was a 3.5 favorite over Ole Miss, which turned out to be pretty gosh darn accurate. But everybody whiffed on that particular prediction, because Indiana did win. But they absolutely crushed Oregon, 56-22, a far cry from their game in the regular season where Indiana won 30-20 over Oregon.
Yeah, I thought that the game would end up being about the same as the first game in terms of that 10-point spread, right? Like I thought Indiana was going to be the better team, and that would kind of progressively demonstrate itself over the course of the game, just like it kind of did in the first matchup. I mean, Oregon basically self-destructed in the first quarter of this game. I mean, the All-American quarterback for Oregon, who is considered to be a potential, high first-round draft choice, probably had the worst quarter of football that he's ever played. Right? I mean, he throws a pick six on his first pass attempt, and he proceeds to fumble twice, fumbling the ball while attempting to throw a pass and a defender knocking it down, and another where he runs into his own running back and the ball comes out. So, I mean, he was to his credit, he played better as the game progressed. That didn't cause him to go in completely into the tank for the rest of the game, which frankly, I think a lot of times would have happened. So I give him credit for being able to hold his composure in that situation.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, they end up passing for 285 yards, which is quite a bit
Hmm.
more than Indiana's 177, right? Um,
Hmm.
so from that perspective, he had some success, but you look at completions and attempts, he was 24 for 40. So they were really going
Right.
for it a lot, and he was whiffing quite a bit.
Right. Well, and Indiana's defense was just, I mean, very aggressive. Let's just say. I mean, he was under duress a lot.
Yes, oh, definitely. Well, and I saw someone pointing out that Indiana got 28 points off of 31 yards of offense because of those
Yeah.
turnovers and the pick six and the block punt.
Yeah.
You know, so there's 28 points right there. Basically, half of what Indiana did on the night came off of defensive points.
Right. And that's because this a lot of this happened in that first quarter, or just maybe slightly more than the first quarter, uh, where it was always on. They were deep in their own territory. Oregon was just starting a drive and they would mess up. Right. So
Yes.
so every time it was a short field, which also explains why Indiana's total offensive number on the passing maybe isn't as large as you might expect it to be given the score, and the fact that
Fernando Mendoza.
Fernando Mendoza was pretty darn accurate and had success throwing the football. He just doesn't have many incompletions, and
Oh, yeah.
so he was being extremely efficient. He just wasn't making a lot of yards because he didn't have a lot of yards to go before he could score a touchdown.
Right, because they were getting such great field position.
Right.
Yeah, he was 17 of 20 for those 177 yards, so only missed 3 passes the whole night. And even more impressive to me, they were 11 of 14 on third downs. So Oregon was getting them to third down quite a bit, but they would always find a way to score either, with a run or with Mendoza, just slipping the pass in, as the guy's about to go out of bounds, right on the sideline. It was very impressive to watch.
It really was. I mean, it was a clinic of efficient, crisp, clean football, both sides of the ball too. I mean, I don't know exactly for their claims that they're really quite simple defensively, right? They really emphasize knowing your roles and responsibilities extremely well, but that they don't have a lot of sophistication on their defense, so their kids aren't confused. They know exactly what they're supposed to be and where they're supposed to do it. But yet they had pressure on Oregon pretty much the whole night.
What was even more impressive about it was when you realized that Indiana does have a lot of depth. Like they made the point before the game started that they've basically been using 14 players on defense, and having people rotate to play multiple positions and things like that. Kurt Signetti even mentioned that after the game, that they have been dealing with some injuries to important players and things like that.
Right.
So even despite that, they were this efficient and, impressive.
Right. And usually when you have that tight of a rotation, you run the risk of having a huge drop off, because then that means the other guys aren't getting many snaps. They're not getting a lot of film, that the coaches can then break down and coach those kids and improve them if they're not even getting snaps in the game, because he tends to play his starters and stay with them almost the entire game, no matter what. And that builds great continuity and everything, but it also usually has the downside of not giving you that experienced depth piece that you need at a critical time. And yet, so far, that has not bitten them.
Right. Kurt Signetti, of course, was getting hailed as, the god of college football, all night, given the performance. But the one criticism I did see from him from some Indiana fans was that he didn't pull out, a lot of those players even in the fourth quarter when the game was over. Like
Right.
Fernando Mendoza was still in there on their last offensive drive. Now, he was just handing the ball off to a running back for the most part, so not like he was exposing himself to much danger there. But still, I think that did maybe frustrate some fans who are looking ahead to the Miami game, just being like, hey, we can't afford to get a key player injured here in garbage time, when we've already sealed the deal.
Well, and I agree with that philosophy. I think what Signetti's doing. I mean the announcement crew was trying to convey, that they believed his logic, and part of his philosophy is that, hey, you know what? If somebody gets hurt, then it's next man up, and it doesn't matter that you haven't had a lot of snaps on the field in a real time game. You've been at our practices, you've been in our meetings. Next man up, let's go. And that's his mentality. And I don't owe you, the opportunity to play in this, major semifinal bowl game, and have that experience. I'm going to play the guy that I think is the best player for that position. And I disagree with that philosophy. I think you do need to play those players, and I don't think you gain that much by saying this group understands my philosophy, and they understand the standard that needs to be met. I think you can do that while also substituting a little bit more freely than Signetti did, and he's getting away with it. So everybody's going to praise him for it. But I can see many opportunities that may come over time where he is going to be criticized for that exact same philosophy.
Well, but as you and I discussed, I think in our text threads, he's going to have no problem with depth in the future after this season, in terms of the recruits
True.
he's going to be able to get and all that sort of stuff. Even players who maybe could, start elsewhere or get paid maybe bigger bucks, at a Texas school or something, but they'll come to Indiana because they want to be coached by Signetti, right? Because they want to get into the NFL and improve themselves as a player.
Right. Well, and he's willing to turn over as much as he needs to. So, I noticed that he only had one player go into the portal, right? They've already got like 12 or 13 portal recruits. And this is while they're still coaching and preparing for games. They're still doing both. They're shopping for the groceries, and they're cooking the meal all at the same time, right? Right. And apparently doing it very well. But I would be curious if that is sustainable. Let's say next year, for as much as this quarterback might be a great fit for their team next year that they got from TCU, maybe he's not as good as Mendoza, and so they don't have quite as much success. All these people that went to Indiana to be coached by Signetti, and they realize, darn, if I'm not the starter, I don't get any playing time at all. That they might be one and dones at Indiana. Okay, I had my year of being coached by the genius. I'm going to go someplace and find some playing time.
Right.
And Signetti will be fine with that.
Right. And maybe that will become one of the trends in football, right? Like how coaches, right, would go and coach under Saban, for a year or two, rehabilitate themselves and then go to another job, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I saw this tweet from Jack Mack on Twitter, and I thought it was pretty enlightening about putting into perspective what Indiana is doing. He says it defies everything we've known about CFB. Their roster ranks 48th in talent, 45th in blue chip ratio, not even close to the 50% ratio that has defined every champion in the 21st century. TCU's blue chip ratio in 2022 was 21%. And it was amazing that TCU made it that far, right? Indiana's is 8%.
Right. I know. It is truly remarkable. And then you watch them play, and some of these wide receivers that were kind of no names, right? They came from all these lesser conferences and stuff, and they are making NFL catches. They are just incredible, and will likely end up getting an opportunity at least to try to compete in the NFL, even though they were no names until Signetti, brought them to Indiana. So I can't disagree. Whatever they're doing, it is the secret sauce, and it's working.
Yeah. So, yeah, of course, everyone was going crazy, in all the threads and, watching Indiana just crush Oregon in a fashion nobody really predicted. So now we've got Indiana versus Miami. Like I said, number 1 versus number 10 in the national championship. Apparently, Indiana is currently 7.5 favorites, according to Vegas. Now, we're recording this on the 11th. The game's not until a week from now, so that could easily change. And frankly, I think the spread would be quite a bit bigger if the game wasn't happening in Miami. The fact that Miami gets the home field advantage is a big deal. And I think it will keep them competitive in this game potentially. Whereas if it was at a totally neutral kind of site, I think I would be going Indiana even harder than I am already.
I totally agree. I'm going to make a prediction too, because this is Miami in the national championship game on basically in their home stadium. There's a bunch of things that go on, prior to the game, in terms of who gets what locker room and all that. There's a visitors locker room and a home locker room. Obviously, the home locker room's probably better, and that's the traditional Miami home locker room. So I'm curious how that all gets handled, right? And
Right.
also the pregame stuff. Is there any traditional Miami home game stuff with sparklers and smoke and all those kinds of things that are classic Miami home game stuff that they sneak in to give them a little bit of a psychological advantage, and maybe to poke the bear of Indiana football and make them a little pissed, and get them distracted by the fact that they were able to sneak in some of this home cooking stuff. That'd be a classic University of Miami thing to do. And so I won't at all be shocked if something like that becomes a little bit of a conversation piece or talking point as this game unfolds, or the preparation for the game and then the game itself.
Right.
Miami will find a way to leverage that home game environment is what they're
Yeah.
going to do.
But I will say, Miami gets about a week and a half off, before the game, since it's on Monday of next week, the 19th.
Right.
And we know, obviously, that they have a very good defense, very good defensive coaching staff. So, I think they will go to the lab and the film room and be studying intently, in terms of what they can do to slow down Indiana defensively. Because if you think about it, if Oregon just wasn't self-destructing so badly, right, with all those turnovers, Indiana probably still would have won, but it would have been a much more competitive game. So I think Miami just got to go in with that whole philosophy of like, let's not, make some mistakes. Let's have good out patterns for our quarterback to quickly get the ball out of his hands, because we know Indiana's going to be bringing pressure and that they can get to us. So let's, do this, try to frustrate some things for Indiana. Other good defenses throughout the year, like Iowa and Penn State, have shown that you can, slow them down. Ohio State, right, kept them to a low scoring situation. So I think there are ways where Miami can make this an interesting game and maybe cause an upset, especially if Indiana's players maybe do get a bit distracted because everybody's singing their praises and they are a massive favorite amongst the public. And it seems like, this is their destiny, so there's a world where maybe they take their foot off the gas a bit and Miami is able to exploit that. But I think Miami needs some things like that, a turnover to go their way early in the game. They need something to get the momentum on their side in the first half. Because if Indiana just controls the tempo of the game in the first half the way they did against Oregon to Miami, I don't see any chance of them winning.
No, I would totally agree. But and that's the key. That's been the key to a lot of these games. Even the Oregon game, if Oregon doesn't self-destruct like they did early in that game might have very well have been a lot closer competition, right? Like that would have been a much more interesting game in the second half had they not basically handed the game lead, 21 gift points to Indiana in the first half. So I don't think Indiana can expect, or is certainly not planning on, Miami gifting them the game like that. But I would also say that in watching the two games, I think Miami's offense, they run the ball very hard. They're very physical on both sides of the ball, very physical. But kind of so is Indiana. So I think this is going to be very much an old school smash mouth kind of football game.
So your kind of football game.
Yes, I am actually very much looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a fun game. Sadly, I'm going to be in Auckland, New Zealand, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to see the game.
Well, I'll be here in the US of A, definitely watching the game. So I'm going to go ahead and give my prediction. I'm going to say that Indiana is going to win. I don't think it's going to be anything near the blowout that was against Oregon. I think the home field advantage, the fact that it is the national championship game, the time they have to prepare. I think all that is going to give Miami the opportunity to make it interesting, but Indiana will win in the end. So let's say it's going to be something like 33 Indiana to 24 Miami.
Good score prediction, Alex. I like it. That is interesting. Yeah, I'm going to say it's going to be an Indiana victory as well. I just feel like if they stay true to what Coach Cignetti's been preaching, and they, like I say, they don't get lost in the shuffle of all the hype over the next week, right? And kind of start reading their own press clippings too much, I would say that Indiana is going to win the football game. And it's going to be maybe 28 Indiana and 17 for Miami. But again, I absolutely can see scenarios where Miami gets out to an early lead or a good start even, and this thing gets really down in the dirt, and then Indiana, having not been in that situation very often, doesn't respond well to being down. Right. And then Miami just kind of runs away with it.
Though, as you mentioned, you and I were watching that Indiana versus Penn State game live because that was the game that was on before our Nebraska UCLA game where we were together in person. And Indiana was down bad in that game and came up with, that miraculous catch and all these amazing plays to somehow claw out, victory there when it looked like they were screwed. So I think they've shown that they can do that if the situation calls for it.
No, I agree, but and there was a couple of other games where it was a very tough game. I mean, I think they struggled a little bit with Iowa and certainly even against Ohio State. It's not like they blew out Ohio State in the conference championship game. So I'm not saying that Indiana has just blown the doors off of everyone and, may not be comfortable with, the tension of a game that's in doubt in the fourth quarter and lose their composure. But things are different because of the finality of a championship game, right? Once things start to unravel a little bit, then sometimes they unravel a lot, right? Which is why even in the NFL, there is some history of NFL teams and games, Super Bowls, that end up being quite an unentertaining blowout because the one team kind of just loses it, right? And I could see that happening in this scenario for either of these teams, Miami or Indiana. But I'm optimistic that both of them have demonstrated the ability to have that mental toughness and focus. And because they both rely strongly on running the football, they both love to run the ball effectively. I mean, I know there's lots of bragging about Mendoza, but the truth is one of the things that makes him so good is that their running game has been pretty darn consistent all year. And Miami's is definitely the strength of their team. So I could see this being a very physical, kind of methodical game. And that's why I'm thinking it might be a little lower scoring, 28-17 rather than a 40 whatever to 30 something.
Yeah. And I am being reminded, like the guy mentioned, the TCU team that went on that run in 2022, 2023, made it to the championship, but then got absolutely shellacked by Georgia, 65-7. I don't know if it'll be that bad, but if things don't go Miami's way, and Indiana does come in focused and not distracted, I could see them winning by 35 points for sure.
Just like the Oregon game or Alabama, right? These last two games. I mean, this I know. If Miami makes some mistakes, particularly early in the game, it's likely that Indiana is going to take advantage of those mistakes and translate them to points. And if they can do that, then they're a little bit of a steamroller. And you're absolutely right. Then it could be a blowout.
And then just to mention, in terms of our postseason predictions, the update from last time is that I'm now up to 11 correct picks while you're at 8 because you predicted Ole Miss would beat Miami and we both went Indiana's way. So unfortunately, there's no way for you to make a comeback here in the national championship game, and we both picked Indiana regardless.
Yes.
So I win this round.
Yes, you have won the season selection competition.
Yes.
Congratulations, Alex.
I'll put the trophy on my wall.
Yes.
All right. Now on the Nebraska side of things, we had a few things we wanted to discuss. We did talk about some of the transfers in and out of the program as of last week when we last did our podcast. We talked about the Kenny Minchey debacle, the Notre Dame quarterback who seemed like he was coming to Nebraska and then at the last minute pulled out his commitment. But thankfully, we did get a replacement for that situation quickly. So former UNLV quarterback Anthony Calandra is officially coming to the University of Nebraska. He was the player of the year in the Mountain West Conference, had 3,500 passing yards this year and 650 rushing yards. So certainly putting up some impressive stats there. Obviously coming up with the caveat that this is all in the Mountain West. So, can he replicate those sorts of skills at the Big Ten level of football? That's the question. But like you said on the previous podcast, the Kenny Minchey guy was a little bit more perspective, potential over performance because he hadn't actually played that much in games, even though he was highly regarded coming out of high school. Whereas this Anthony guy has a lot of on-field performance. So does that actually make you feel better about him?
It does. What I would say is that when you have a guy that has, a lot of snaps competing at the collegiate level, then he's not going to be overwhelmed by the moment. And that experience is going to lend itself to just a little bit more maturity of decision making. He's going to have seen things before. And oftentimes people will talk about how the game slows down the more experienced you become. You see things a little quicker, a little easier, and so you'd like to think that maybe because of that, that our young guy here, he's going to be a senior, but our quarterback is going to be able to handle that. Now he had 2 years also as a starter. Or as a regular player. I don't know if he started all the games, but at Virginia, and he pretty much threw the same number of interceptions as he did touchdowns during those 2 years at Virginia. So he struggled with Power 4 football when he was in that level previously, right? But that was when he was 18 and 19 years old. Now he's going to come to us at 21 or 22 years old, right? He's a more mature kid. He's now, experienced basically 3 years of football, and he's had a lot of snaps. He's seen a lot of defenses. I think a lot of it's going to have to do with how he gels with the offense that Dana Holgorsen wants to run versus the one that he was running, that Mullen ran at UNLV. And I'm hopeful that he will do well with that transition, and so that he can be confident and have that quick thinking ability to progress. Now, the thing that is his added component of running the football, where he is decisive and he knows how to have that internal clock and tuck it and go, right? Now, sometimes those guys can tend to do that too quickly. But we've had a guy that did it too slowly, right? So I think that might lend itself to Dana's offense a little more. So we'll see. But I think of the quarterbacks that we had a legitimate chance at enticing to Lincoln, I think this is a pretty darn good get on our part.
Right. Well, and I was going to say, if you've got to err on one side or the other, being too quick to tuck the ball or being too late, I think I'll definitely take error on the side of too early, because at least you get some positive yards out of a situation, even if it's just like 2 or 3, versus what we've saw under Dillon, which is, the many sacks or, him running for his life situations. So I'll take it, just get the first downs, right?
Exactly. And I've been a believer in that kind of philosophy. Now, if you can do that without being high turnover, which he was this past season at UNLV, that's the thing that was the dramatic aha moment, we hope, for him and his development as a quarterback, was he went from a guy that tended to throw a lot of interceptions, but also threw touchdown passes and produced some decent yardages of passing. Now this past season, he had very good yardage, 3,500 yards, and he had like, I don't know, 22, 23 touchdown passes and like 8 or 9 interceptions. So not nothing, but way better than what he had performed previously. So you'd like to think that is going to lend itself to him being successful
Right.
in Nebraska's offense.
And then we've been discussing how we definitely needed 2 quarterbacks because of our situation. And we've got our second one in Daniel Kalin, who actually was a former recruit of Nebraska's before the Dylan Raiola situation manifested. And then Daniel Kalin left to go to a different school because they knew he wasn't going to be the starter with Dylan there. But now with Dylan gone, Danny has now come back into the program. So I think he's in a good position to kind of be that backup guy. You know, he's probably not going to be a starter right out of the gate. He's kind of been at a even smaller university, up to this point. But certainly somebody with some, once again, more of the potential guy with good physical traits that we saw something in previously.
Right. Now, understand, he was at Nebraska his freshman year.
Right.
And he was in a competition supposedly with Raiola as a freshman. And Danny was actually a really key member of our recruiting class, as he was an early commit to Nebraska because he's from the state. And so he committed to Nebraska early. And then when the Dylan thing happened late, he sustained his commitment and went ahead and signed with Nebraska, even though Dylan came in last minute. And from everything we knew, even when he ultimately did go into the portal the next year, he didn't burn bridges, right? People respected him for the choice that he made, understood why he was leaving, all that sort of stuff. And then he left and went to another institution. I think it was Virginia, ironically, and he played there. Again, did not start because I think he went to another school where he had a chance, an opportunity to compete for a starting job, but he lost that competition, right? And whoever the other guy was, and I don't know the name of that guy, but he ended up being the starter and Danny was the backup, right? So he hasn't seen a lot of snaps, but his skill set is or was, coming out of high school, considered rather elite, right? He was an Elite 11 quarterback. He was invited to that competition and I believe won the accuracy competition at the Elite 11 quarterback camp.
Right.
So he's not without physical talent, and he's a little bit more of a capable runner and things. So I think he's going to be right in the mix, along with TJ Latif and this other young man. And so we now have a legitimate quarterback room that I think has 3 guys who are capable of playing at a Big Ten level potentially by next fall. So I feel pretty good now about where we're at. I don't think we have a Heisman Trophy winner in our quarterback room, but I think we have some guys that can win Big Ten football games for us.
Right. And then you just told me before the podcast that apparently we may be looking at bringing in a third quarterback because the coaches were alerted of a particular recruit who was local to the Las Vegas area when we did the bowl game there. And that we looked at his film and saw some promising things, and we're now pursuing him. He's a high school recruit for the 2026 class.
Right.
So he'd be another investment in our future if we actually did get him.
Right. And keep in mind that he would be basically a backfill replacement for Dayton Raiola, who decommitted from us, prior to signing day. So it would kind of get the quarterback room back in the scenario where you kind of want to have a quarterback in every year of your recruiting cycles. And that would kind of put us back into that mode, I think, if we were able to get this young man to commit as well. Now, I understand that he may have some other teams that are also interested in him, and he may be taking some other visits.
Right.
Yeah, we have a couple of other guys that we're going after that are 2026 recruits, including one of the top defensive linemen who decommitted from Texas and is now back on the market. And he had a very good visit to Nebraska. This again is a high school senior who would be coming in as a 26 recruit this spring, fall rather. Boy, it would be great if we could get that young man. But since it hasn't happened yet, we'll wait and see.
All right, and then I'm just going to go through a list here of some other additions we've had through the portal to the program. South Carolina right tackle Tree Babaldi. Probably going to butcher some of these names here, but we'll do our best. Iowa State linebacker Will Hawthorne. San Diego State safety Dwayne McDougal. Oregon State linebacker Dexter Foster. We also have UCLA defensive lineman Anthony Jones, UCLA wide receiver Quasi Gilmer. We have Florida International quarterback Victor Evans III, and Townsend quarterback Jason Shiggs.
Cornerback, not quarterback.
Right. And then from Michigan State, a long snapper from them, Jack Wills. Yes, Michigan State long snapper.
Right, and we got a defensive back from Townsend, Jason Shiggs, and we now just even since we've been on our podcast here, it's now official that Daniel Kaline is in as an additional quarterback from Virginia, and also a community college, junior college All-American defensive lineman from Iowa Western Community College, who was actually being pursued by a lot of top programs. Andy Berbarija. I don't know. I'm sure I butchered that, but he just committed as well. So.
Okay. Well, hey, more linemen will make Dad happy.
Oh yes, exactly. And like I said, I know we're in on a guy who is a Texas decommit, University of Texas decommit, and that could be a thing. And interestingly, Keona Davis, who was one of the key Nebraska kids who portaled out of Nebraska, has not yet announced his new destination. I'm a little shocked that he hasn't been talked about a lot more, because I think athletically and in terms of potential, that kid still has a pretty high ceiling, and he's going to be going into I believe his redshirt sophomore year. I just think that there's a chance that maybe no one picks him up that he is happy with, and maybe for the second year in a row, he comes back to Nebraska.
Right.
I'm not predicting that, but I'm just saying the fact that he hasn't been picked up is an indicator.
Right. Well, and speaking of that, we did have a couple players who withdrew their name from the portal, meaning that they are staying at Nebraska. So that includes defensive backs Larry Taver Jr. and Braylon Prude, as well as linebacker Willis McGahee IV.
Yes.
The one new departure who is going into the portal from Nebraska is Kenneth Williams, who was our kickoff returner this year, who we gave a scholarship to in the middle of the season because of his, talents there. But unfortunately, it seems like we weren't able to work out an agreement with him for him to kind of be a main running back for us.
He wanted to be in the mix, or promised, I guess, maybe to be in the mix in the running back rotation. And based on our running back room, I think our coaches were honest with him that we were very happy with what he was doing as a kickoff returner. He was all Big Ten as a kickoff returner, so we love that about him. But I just couldn't objectively say, yep, you're likely to be right there in the mix for the starting job. And so he wanted to go see what other people would do for him, both financially, in terms of above and beyond a scholarship, maybe some NIL, and maybe we weren't in a position to offer that because there wasn't any more room for money, because I do believe we've probably allocated money for a portal edition in the running back room that has not yet happened, right? And so we couldn't give it to him and then also give it to some guy that we're pursuing, right? So they kind of had to. That's just one of these things that you have to deal with now in managing your roster. And so he ended up, I believe, at Michigan State. I think he's already committed to Michigan State.
There you go. Now, so there are some promising names, within that list. Some people coming from like San Diego State, right, following Rob Aurick from there. Now that he's our defensive coordinator, some of those aren't too surprising. But I know that there are some more high name players that we have pursued and not gotten, and that's kind of left you feeling disappointed in the performance of Pat Stewart, our general manager, who was hired this year, somebody that Matt Rule worked with in the NFL ranks, doing that same sort of thing, talent management and everything. Now, obviously, it is a very different game doing that in the college football world versus the NFL world, and we're still here on January 11th. The portal doesn't close until the 16th, so jury is still out on who else we could maybe get in here. But at this kind of midway point, what's your evaluation, Dad?
Well, I would say we've done okay, right? But we needed to do exceptional because keep in mind that we had a very small 2026 freshman or high school recruiting class, right? We only had like 10 players in our high school commits, which is why we're still going after some people. And we mentioned a quarterback out of Vegas, and then this defensive lineman who decommitted from Texas by the name of Dylan Behrman, who did pay us a visit, but he's also going to some other major programs after us, Kentucky being one of them, who's been kind of our nemesis on the recruiting trail. They have some kryptonite phrase that they must use whenever they're recruiting a player who went to Nebraska. They just find our best players and then go take them from us. And I don't know if it's because they just have that much more money or they have some series of things that they highlight about what's wrong with Nebraska sports and football, and then the player switches, including our quarterback that we just lost to them. It just seems that way. I would give us a failing grade on defensive tackle, which, in my opinion, other than our need to replace Dylan Raiola and to rebuild our quarterback room, that defensive line position, specifically the defensive tackle position, should have been priority number 2 behind quarterback. And we have pretty much struck out there. Now, I just announced that we did get one guy who was from a junior college. Well, the jump from junior college to Division I, Power 4 college football can be quite large, and so the success rate of JUCO kids becoming great at the Power 4 collegiate level that's a lower chance probability than if they were coming from a Power 4 or even like a MAC, a Group of 5 type level, right? It's a much bigger jump, and it turns out this kid academically isn't ready yet. And so he's not going to be able to come now. He's going to have to stay at the community college until the spring semester is over and graduate, and then he can join us in June. Missing out on spring practice and all the weight training at the prime Nebraska facilities is going to be huge for this kid. And sadly, he's not going to be able to do that. So I question how much he's going to be able to contribute for us next year. He's probably going to be a kid that needs a year in the program before he can be successful. And that's a bummer. So right. I'm optimistic that maybe he's going to be a good player in the future, but I don't believe we can look at him and say, I can count on him to be a run stopper or a 30 play, 25 play defensive tackle for Nebraska, this coming football season.
Right. Though, as you mentioned, some other highly regarded programs were going after him. So clearly other people saw talent in him as well as us. So that is right. Something.
Yes. And that's potential, right? That's that potential versus performance thing.
It is a weird situation because, as we've said, it seems like from what Matt Rule has said in some of his statements and everything, that he really thought that this clearinghouse thing that was being established through the court settlement and everything was really going to have a big impact, and that things would be more calm this year than they were last year, which unfortunately has proven to not be the case. And it seems like that, there's plenty of tampering going on with players, where there's communication happening even before players in the portal, because these kids are going to these other schools pretty quickly, and not, giving Nebraska the time of day when we come and offer them, something new. It seems like, our coaches may have to adjust to the Wild West reality that is college football.
I would 100% agree with that summary, Alex. That was what I was going to say. I didn't quite get back around to, I'm giving an F on defensive line. I'm giving him, a B plus on the quarterback situation. There's a TBD there, obviously, but I don't know that we could have done a lot better. I would love to have some stud that we knew was, like the TCU quarterback that Indiana got, or, one of those types of guys. But we weren't getting a sniff from those people, right? Because that's where we are right now in terms of reputation and, a desired destination. Now, if we can get kids to campus, our facilities are so fabulous. Our people are so great organizationally that I think we give ourselves a chance. I'm going to be very curious what happens with some of these other defensive tackles that we have gotten to campus. How many of them go to another visit and then end up committing there? Generally speaking, in this portal era, if you bring somebody on campus and you're not able to wow them so much and put together a package, that is so good that they can't leave campus without saying yes, you're probably not going to get them. Right? Like if they're still of the mindset that I want to go see what other people have to offer, that probably means you didn't impress them enough.
Right.
That's just the reality in an age where the athlete pretty much has all the power in this dynamic of negotiation. Right. So, and that to me is a demonstration of our general manager's failure. I think that they, like you said, were not prepared for the craziness of the Wild West. They didn't understand that the $25 to $35 million target of last year's roster has already gone to probably 45 to 50 million, if not more, and we're still sitting there at 25 to 35. Right? So we're way behind the 8 ball of the people that really are playing this game right. And if you look at what some of the key NIL people are at some of the institutions that have really excelled at this, like Texas Tech, SMU, that sort of thing, you see those guys get interviewed now that those people are starting to come out of the woodwork a little bit. They're all super comfortable with high risk, and I just don't think Nebraska has that system in place. I think we're trying to do much more of a thoughtful Moneyball kind of thing, and we're basically, our cycle is a year behind. Our general manager needs to now understand the aggressiveness and the craziness that is the portal if you want to be successful.
Right. But as I said, we are, at the midway point here, so we'll come to you with a podcast after the national championship game, obviously, and that'll be after the portal has closed. So we'll be able to give our full evaluation at that time.
Exactly. I mean, just tonight, I just mentioned 2 more portal commitments tonight. So, and I think those are both pretty decent additions. So, when it's all said and done, maybe we've done okay on offensive line. Again, not great. Not, oh, wow, we're going to be way better in the offensive line next year than we were last year. But I don't think we've been awful either, based on what the players that we were able to entice to come and visit. I think we've done okay with that group. But there's an awful lot of offensive linemen that, we could have gone after, but we didn't. Probably because we did reach out to them and they expressed zero interest in coming to Nebraska.
Right.
That's just the reality.
Yep. And then this is still just a report, so not official yet, but quite a few places are saying it, which is that Nebraska has found our defensive line coach. What they are saying is that it's Corey Brown, who's the defensive line coach at Miami of Ohio, which is a MAC school that I'm somewhat familiar with because they were the rival of Ohio University, my alma mater.
Right.
But yeah, interestingly, he did work with Rob Aurick, our current defensive coordinator. They were on the same coaching staff for a year in the past. So that may have been a connection that Rob maybe recommended Corey to Matt Rule as a possible candidate. And Miami, Ohio does have a good record in terms of sacks. I think they have 52 sacks as a defense over the past 2 seasons that Corey has been there. He was also at Miami of Ohio for like a stint in the 2010s as well, and then he went somewhere else and then kind of came back to Miami of Ohio, sounds like. So somebody with experience, once again, not the big name hire, coming from a major Power 4 university, or somebody from the NFL, which I know you had speculated about, that maybe we're going after someone from the NFL, and that's why we hadn't heard about it for a while. But what's your thought on if this report is true?
I believe the report is true, but I also believe that we probably were going after somebody. And you would have thought that if we were waiting around for an NFL team coach to become available, that we would have, that guy would have already agreed to terms and just was keeping it quiet until the moment in time to announce. The fact that didn't happen tells me that we were going after somebody and then we whiffed, right? Like they ultimately said no to us. So I think it's reasonable to assume that Corey Brown was not our first choice, probably wasn't our second or even third choice. Okay, so that tells you where we're at again on how we're perceived in terms of being a destination for even a top flight coach. Right, we clearly were hoping and tried to go after Elijah Robinson, who was a great defensive tackle coach at Texas A&M, and then became the D coordinator, I think, at Syracuse, and then I think now is maybe at LSU or something. He ended up going somewhere else. He did not choose to be at Nebraska, and he would have been a household name, a guy that had recruited a number of 5-star athletes over recent years. Now, this guy, he hasn't necessarily got some great official recruiting record, but he does have a good record of creating all conference and even some NFL caliber defensive tackles. And keep in mind, he's not the defensive line coach. He is now, because they're breaking these things up because they can now have more coaches, he is the defensive tackles coach. So he has basically 2 positions, right? He's going to have to teach those guys how to play the 1 and the 3. The nose guard and the defensive tackle position, so that you can have some flexibility and have some 5-man fronts and some 4-man fronts and some that sort of stuff. And so it's a very focused kind of arrangement or structure. And who's overseeing the overall defensive line is actually the other coach that's going to coach our defensive ends, and I can't remember his name right now because he's new also. So, but basically, our new D coordinator was able to get 2 coaches in play that are going to run the defensive line. So, you know what? If you're going to trust the coordinator, you got to let him get his own guys a little bit. We'll see how it plays out. I think the guy who's the defensive line coach for Indiana was at James Madison with Cignetti, and before that he was with some other lesser school even than that. So he had no Power 4 experience in anything, and I think his defensive line plays pretty darn well. So good coaches come in all sizes and from all kinds of locations. So I'm willing to give the guy a shot, but it definitely is something to keep an eye on because he comes to us without the slam dunk. He's obviously going to be a great player, unlike, say, when LSU is putting their coaching staff together, or Penn State, or even Michigan is putting their coaching staff together. Kyle Whittingham was able to go out and get incredibly experienced, Power 4 experienced coordinators and lots of Power 4 experienced coaches. So he immediately has a coaching staff that is filled with incredible talent, right? And known, proven. And that's the difference between our staff and Michigan staff.
Well, and that's the difference between Nebraska's football program for the last 20 years and Michigan's, right?
Correct. It's not about the money. It's because I'm sure we had the same kind of money pool that we could have spent. It's about how they perceive the job, right?
Right, exactly. All right, and then one last thing. This will be a recurring segment on our podcast for this half of the year, which will be the basketball update. The Nebraska basketball team played against Indiana. It was actually down by 16 points at one point in the game, but managed to make a comeback and win. So getting them up to 16-0 in terms of their record. Now they do have some tougher teams coming up later in their schedule, like against Michigan and Purdue and things like that. So that 0 isn't going to stay there for too much longer. But right now, it's a wave of good feelings there in Lincoln, and I'm happy to see it.
Yes, I mean it actually has been fun to kind of watch it. I can't claim to be a regular watcher of Nebraska's basketball team, just because I'm not much of a college basketball fan. I fell away from my interest in it. I used to be, but that's just a sport that I haven't spent a lot of time and energy on because we have been so consistently poor at the sport. But this has been a fun team to watch. They play great defense. They have some size that allows them to be legit, in terms of defending especially in the Big Ten. I mean, almost every Big Ten team has a 6'11" or 7-foot guy. Some of them have 2 and 3 7-foot guys. And so if you don't have some big boys that can hang in there physically and slow those kinds of people down, you're going to struggle in the Big Ten, and we have for years. Now we have a couple of guys that are in that size range, 6'10" plus, and big bodied guys, and they can also shoot threes. We have so a nice diverse group of players that can shoot balls from the outside, but also play pretty darn good defense, and that's been a really good recipe for success for Nebraska so far. They're not winning against a bunch of super top teams, but they have beaten Michigan State, which was an incredible win. That was a top 10 win at the time. And they beat Indiana at Indiana just recently after being down 16 points. So they've shown some maturity and some real stick-to-itiveness, grittiness that I think is a strong indication that they're going to have some success.
Yeah, I would agree. All right. Well, we'll be coming back to you next week with the results of the national championship game and the closing of the portal, where Nebraska lands on all that. We'll have official confirmation our defensive line coach at that point in time. So that'll kind of be our wrap-up podcast for the college football season. I know it's sad that it's already here, but hey, you know what? It's been a fun season in terms of nationally, a lot of good games, a good fun playoff here. This Indiana storyline, everyone's saying people are going to make a movie out of it. And I think that is pretty likely, especially if they win here, this final test that they have to go through. So yeah, it is an exciting time for college football in that regard.
It is. And I was disappointed on the New Year's Day, like the Orange Bowl attendance. That Orange Bowl stadium was not full. I know that the sport's getting great eyeballs through television because the TV numbers are pretty darn good, and especially the ones involving Indiana, because they have captured the hearts and minds of the American people, and so that's wonderful for the sport. And I think it's going to be a great championship game. I'm really optimistic that it'll be entertaining.
Yeah, we didn't mention that, but that is true. When you looked at the wide shots of the stadium there, it was all red. It was basically an Indiana home game.
Absolutely. And I still believe, even though this game is being held in Miami's backyard, because those tickets have been available for a long time, and like any championship game, which is different than all the games, more so than any other game this year, it's going to be mostly purchased in advance by corporations and companies who are using it as a opportunity to schmooze clients and stuff, right? So how many of the individual team fans get there. Instead of it being a 50-50 deal, it's probably 30% are given to Indiana and 30% are given to Miami. But then because it's in Miami, a lot of the corporate stuff is also going to have kind of a Miami lean, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So that's going to probably help Miami balance that crowd out, because the other open market stuff will almost all go Indiana. Indiana people are probably going to be stumbling over top of each other to get to that game, right? So I could see it still being a pretty pro Indiana crowd.
Yeah, we'll have to see.
Because again, Miami has no fan base.
Well, right, but all the bandwagon fans will be there because hey, this is their first chance at a national championship game in many years.
It's 2001. Yep, when they beat us in 2001. Yep.
That's right.
That was the end. That was the close of the Miami championship era until now.
There you go. Oh. All right. Well, we hope you out there enjoyed listening to this podcast. You can email us at collegefootballthrowdown@gmail.com. You can leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also find us on YouTube under College Football Throwdown and subscribe to us there. So we always love hearing feedback from the fans. Thank you out there for listening, and thank you, Dad, for joining me for this episode. Until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.